Merrick Garland unveiled his domestic terrorism plan tonight, and earlier today, and he had a 4-pillar plan. Actually, I kind of want to go over some of the things that he talked about. And he says we're never going to take our eyes off the risk of another devastating attack by foreign terrorists. And he says at the same time, we must respond to domestic terrorism with the same sense of purpose and dedication. He talks about 4 pillars, and these 4 pillars that are going to be really what they're focusing on with domestic terrorism is going to be, is actually really quite scary when you look at what the pillars are, in fact. They are looking at working with tech companies. So the administration organized its national strategy around 4 pillars aimed at analyzing, preventing, disrupting, and confronting catalysts for extremism. It emphasized increased information and intelligence sharing among law enforcement and tech companies. Is that not scary or what? So with this domestic terrorism plan that they're looking to unveil, it is, they're looking to really target Americans. Let's go ahead and listen. I think we've got this queued up now. Let's go ahead and watch. This is Merrick Garland. This is about 3 minutes of he gave about a 25-minute speech. And this is the key, because these 3 minutes right here with Merrick Garland, these 3 minutes, they redefine. The administration is redefining what a terrorist is. So they are defining this in a very broad way, which would allow them to target absolutely everybody under this new domestic terrorism, this war on domestic terrorism that is being waged. Let's go ahead and watch this clip from Merrick Garland.
That domestic terrorism and violent extremism comes in many forms. 6 years ago, 9 black men and women were shot and killed while praying at their church in Charleston. 4 years ago, this week, an attacker shot 4 people at a congressional baseball practice after confirming that the players were Republicans. 2 months later, a man drove his car into a crowd of peaceful protesters against white supremacism in Charlottesville, murdering 1 and injuring many more. In 2018, 11 Jewish worshipers were shot and killed at their synagogue in Pittsburgh, and 2 summers ago, 23 people, most of whom were Latino, were gunned down while shopping at a Walmart in El Paso. Such attacks are not only unspeakable tragedies for the victims' loved ones, they are also a tragedy for our country, an attack on our core ideals as a society. We must not only bring our federal resources to bear, we must adopt a broader societal response to tackle the problem's deeper roots. This effort begins with taking a rigorous look at the problem we face. During President Biden's first week in office, he directed the administration to undertake an assessment of the domestic terrorism threat and then to use that assessment to develop the national strategy being released today. Our intelligence and law enforcement agencies undertook that assessment in the first several weeks of this administration. In March, they concluded that domestic violent extremists posed an elevated threat to the homeland in 2021. Our experience on the ground confirms this. The number of open FBI domestic terrorism investigations this year has increased significantly. According to an unclassified summary of the March intelligence assessment, the 2 most lethal elements of the domestic violence extremist threat are racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and militia violent extremists. In the FBI's view, the top domestic violent extremist threat comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocated for the superiority of the white race. The March assessment concluded that the militia violent extremist threat, which is described as those who, quote, take overt steps to violently resist or facilitate the overthrow of the United States government in support of their belief that the United States government is purportedly exceeding its constitutional authority, also increased last year and will almost certainly continue to be elevated throughout 2021. Particularly concerning is the March assessment's observation that the threat from lone offenders or small cells poses significant detection and disruption challenges because of those actors' capacity for independent radicalization to violence, ability to mobilize discreetly, and access to firearms. The domestic violent extremist threat is also rapidly evolving. As FBI Director Wray has noted, we continue to observe actors driven by a diverse set of violent motivations, sometimes personalized and developed from a mix of violent ideologies. Developments in technology exacerbate the overall threat. Today, people may be drawn to social media and then to encrypted communication.
All right, so you see it with Merrick Garland, he's talking about all of these various different attacks that have happened in the country he starts about 6 years ago, and he says, well, we had an attack on, there was an attack on Republicans, there was an attack on Jews, there was an attack on, Hispanic people, there's an attack on, he goes through and he lists all of these various different attacks that historically have been called hate crimes. So now we're seeing that the definition of a domestic terrorist is actually the definition of a hate crime. And that definition has expanded over the years. The idea of a hate crime, the reason why we've seen many increases, one of the reasons I should say, I haven't actually looked at the actual numbers and whether or not I haven't done the full deep dive into the data on that. But I do know that one of the increased factors, if not maybe the only one, like I said, I haven't done all the research, is that the definition of hate crimes has expanded. So what used to be a hate crime had a narrow definition, and we had few hate crimes. Well, when you expand that definition to include more and more things, then suddenly you have a rise in hate crimes. You don't necessarily have a rise in crime, but you have a rise in hate crimes, and you never really even had a rise in hate crimes necessarily. You just expanded the definition. And so over the years, we've seen this expansion of this definition of hate crimes, and it is increased and included other groups, or maybe if the person wasn't exactly targeting them because of their race, their sexual orientation, their gender, or any of those things, it was considered a hate crime if they maybe, while committing an offense, uttered insulted the person using an insult of some way that was targeting them because of their race or gender or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, whatnot. So that started to include all of these crimes where, when people are looking to insult others, oftentimes they just go with the lowest hanging fruit. It's not necessarily what's on the top of their mind. It's not in their brain, but they decide to call that person a slur of some kind because it's the first thing they can think of in their brain. It's not necessarily the reason they're committing the crime. And I think a lot of us have had an issue with this expanding definition of a hate crime. We see that there are crimes are being committed. Maybe there is a crime where it is interracial or different sex or genders or sexualities committing crimes against one another. And it's not always motivated by those differences. It's instead motivated by something else. But because the person happened to yell something that was offensive, that is a slur, it is then labeled a hate crime. So that expanding definition has it has allowed for politicians to get in there and say, we have this big problem. We have a rise in racism. We have a rise in sexism. We have a rise in homophobia. Anybody with a brain can tell you that is not true. That is just not true. We are living in an era right now, today in 2021, when fewer people are feeling hatred towards others because of their race, gender, sexual orientation, or any of the other numerous things that there are on the hate crimes list. Anybody with a brain, I think, could actually look at 2021 and say, we are absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, better, more progressive, more enlightened, whatever you want to call it, today in 2021 than we were in 1960. And you would be a liar if you thought otherwise. We don't have segregation in this country right now. We do allow everybody the right to vote that's over the age of 18 and that is a United States citizen. We have allowed gay marriage. We are not banning people from attending events because of their religion or their sex or their gender or any of these other things. So it is completely false. The notion, I do not believe it. I will not believe it. I will not be gaslit into believing it. I will not be gaslit. And I know many of you watching will not be gaslit into believing that this country is worse in 2021 than it was in 1960. Back when people could not even be out, when there were no representations of gay folks on television or in movies, let alone could you come out to even your own family, certainly couldn't get married, couldn't buy a house or adopt children. Today is different. Same thing for women. There was an era where women could not vote. Women could not open bank accounts. Women had to constantly say to salesmen, let me ask my husband, because a woman had to ask her husband. Those days are not today in 2021. Do we have some of that here and there in communities, people that maybe want to live in a more conservative era back in, they want to kind of revert back to 1950 or 1960? Sure, there are some people who still want to live like that. But the vast majority of the country has moved on. In fact, now the vast majority of Republicans support gay marriage. There was a time in my lifetime when that wasn't the case. So we have moved forward when it comes to progress. We have progressed. Could we do more? Yes, of course. We could always be better. We could always improve. We could always work on this, but we are not reeling backwards. And that is gaslighting from the powers that be. And there's a reason they're doing this. This is not just to win elections. There's more to this than just playing politics, rallying people up, and gaslighting all of us into believing that we are living in a horrific time of slavery and oppression, and that there is no other time period in America's history that is worse than today. Today, it is just all about the white man. As I sit here, an Asian woman, talking to the many of you, no, it is only white men who have the voice and the power in this country. It's unbelievable. And now what's unbelievable, it's unbelievable that they are now transferring the already ever expanding definition of hate crime, and they are now labeling it domestic terrorism. So they expanded it to the point where they could no longer expand it anymore. And so they just had to change the definition and morph it into domestic terrorism. A domestic terrorist, a terrorist, whether they be domestic or foreign, is somebody who has a political agenda and is trying to make political change using violence. They blow things up, they shoot up areas, they kidnap people, they hijack, and they do these things for a political agenda. That is the very specific definition of a terrorist. They are trying to affect change or send a message to the government or to the powers that be. That is a terrorist. That means that when somebody comes over here from some sort of an Islamist extremist organization and they blow things up or they hijack or whatever it is that they might do, they're doing it because they are trying to send a signal to the U.S. government that they want something. They're not doing it just to terrorize you. They're doing it because they have an agenda. That agenda, if you are from an extremist organization in the Middle East, is likely that you want the U.S. to withdraw from the Middle East. And that has been the message from the attacks on Americans by foreign terrorists who are from the Middle East. The message has been consistent, and that is, get out of our side of the world. And we instead say, oh, no, we must stay because look at these terrorist attacks that you do on us. You attack us because you want us to leave. And so we're not going to leave. Oh, no, we're going to stay. We're going to stay. And we're going to actually make things worse. We're going to invade more countries. We're going to destabilize more regions. That's our solution. And then you keep bombing us. You keep hijacking. You keep kidnapping. Fine, we're going to keep doing it worse. We're going to go 10 times harder on you because we must stop these terrorists who are terrorizing us. See, this circular argument is dangerous, right? When they say to us, well, we have to be there because look at, they keep attacking us. And then they don't stop to tell you why they're attacking us. Well, they're attacking us because we're over there. Yeah, but don't listen to that. You don't pay attention to that. We need to be over there. We need to keep fighting. We need to continue lining the pockets of our military industrial complex and continuing to fearmonger the American people into voting for certain politicians, because if not, all hell's going to break loose and your life is going to be destroyed. Even though last time I checked, ISIS did not destroy my life, nor yours. Are they destroying other people's lives? Sure, absolutely, but not ours, not here in America. This is why so many of us say, get out, move on, let's come home. We don't need to be there. We are making the situation worse for Americans. We're spending all of our money over there. We're sending children now who weren't even born during 9/11. Now we're sending them off to war to fight this fight, and they don't even know what they're really fighting. And we're doing it, and because we say we're fighting terrorism. Well, the reason why we're fighting terrorism is because they don't want us over there. They want us to leave their part of the world. Fair enough. We would become terrorists, every last one of us. I can guarantee you, me, many of us would fight and potentially have to fight dirty if our country were invaded. If the United States were invaded by a foreign country, you bet your life many of us would fight. And then we'd be called terrorists by that country. They would say, look at all these terrorists. We're just here trying to make peace, and they're terrorizing us. They're bombing our bases and kidnapping our troops, and then they fly all the way over to our country and they attack us using a variety of different guerrilla warfare style methods. Oh no, they're terrorists, so we must stay. We must stay. And we're saying, no, the reason why we're doing this is because we want you to go. You see this problem? Well, this is a problem because now that they're labeling all of these hate crimes that would be considered hate crimes as terrorism, that circular logic is going to be used on us here in this country. They're going to say, well, because you people are fighting back in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about all the various ways that people might be fighting back. They're going to say, well, then we need to continue to infringe on your civil liberties, spy on you, detain you, coerce you, trap you. We're going to continue to do all of this because you people are domestic terrorists. And then we say, well, we are resisting, we are dissenting because you're doing this to us. And then they say, no, we're doing this to you because you're resisting and you're dissenting. You see this problem? Yeah, well, that problem has gotten us into a 20-year, if not longer, war in the Middle East. And that is how long it's going to be lasting here in this United States if we don't wake up to what Merrick Garland just announced to us today. He just announced to us today that they are going to be combating domestic terrorists in this country, that they have redefined what a domestic terrorist is, and that they're going to be going after them, all of these domestic terrorists, you and me, really, probably, matter of time. And they're going to be using big tech to help. So when we want to know how did all this censorship come into play and these control tactics where they can tell us that we do not have the right to peacefully protest anymore if you're protesting something they don't like, the powers that be, or they say, oh no, we need to make it illegal for you to be in the streets because a pandemic or something, and you don't think that they'll come up with more of that in order to control us. You never know. And my guess is, hey, if you got the weapon, why not use it? And that is what they will do to us. So it is very alarming to me that Merrick Garland comes out there today and says, as if he's some sort of hero, that they have redefined what a domestic terrorist is, and that it's anyone who commits a hate crime against another group of people, even if they don't have a political agenda. They don't have any real political agenda. They don't have any motivation. They might just be crazy, quite frankly. But now it's domestic terrorism, even if they're not asking for any sort of governmental change. And now, even more alarming about all of this, is anyone who protests, anyone who takes to the streets in a protest is going to be looked at as a possible domestic terrorist. If they don't like your message, if they don't like why you're protesting, you will be labeled a domestic terrorist. And what does that mean exactly? Well, if they're intending on using the intelligence community, intelligence sharing, law enforcement, and tech companies, my guess is this means you're going to be spied on. They're going to be making a domestic terrorist watch list, and your name might end up on it. And when it does, what will they be allowed to do? Will they be allowed to spy on all of your social media? Will they be allowed to listen in on your phone calls? They already do that. Are they going to be allowed to come into your home and confiscate all of your computers and take your things and probably never give them back? Are they allowed to follow you? Are they allowed to trap you with entrapment, which is increasingly happening with law enforcement? We're finding out that, it turns out during the January 6th insurrection, a lot of the insurrectionists were actually undercover FBI agents. We're finding this out, that they're often egging people on. We found out that one of the perpetrators that was looking to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer was actually an FBI agent who was there for the ride. I mean, look, they're allowed to spy, right? They're allowed to be undercover. They're allowed to gather information. But now it seems like they're crossing into egging it on, going along with it, egging it on. And so they do this all under the guise of, we've got to get these domestic terrorists. Well, who is a domestic terrorist? If they're not going to, this definition absolutely, under every circumstance, needs to be narrow and extremely, extremely narrow. You cannot just label anything that you want as domestic terrorism, because when you do that, then all of a sudden we all fall under that umbrella eventually. And that means all of us can be labeled domestic terrorists. All of us can be detained indefinitely, maybe? I mean, what is going to be the deal here? What are they going to be allowed to do? What is the new Patriot Act 2.0 going to be? Where they're allowed to infringe on our civil liberties, all in the name of combating domestic terrorism. So it's extremely alarming that they're now not only redefining what a domestic terrorist is, but they're now saying that they're also going to get the intelligence community involved and big tech involved. And they're essentially going to be going after now, Americans. That's what a domestic terrorist is. They've announced today they're going to be going after Americans. And these are going to be Americans who they believe have potentially the propensity to commit a crime. Not one who already has, but one that they think might. Well, how would they know? How would they know that if they're not spying on you? Now they're allowed to. Because Biden's AG, Merrick Garland, who was supposed to be a Supreme Court justice, has just announced it. Yeah. And we all know that at first, the main group they're going to be targeting are Trump supporters. They're just going to be going after Trump supporters. They're going to be labeling Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Josh Hawley and probably, I would imagine, Matt Gaetz. There's several that are loud and gaining a lot of traction in Congress. And they're saying that they're even going to be looking at them as potentially leaders in these domestic terrorist movements. That they need to be potentially removed from Congress, that they need to be potentially looked at. There are rumblings of people talking about these things on the news, on MSNBC, on CNN, talking about how they need to identify the leaders of these domestic terrorist organizations and that some of those leaders might be sitting members of Congress. Are you kidding me? So this is not actually going after domestic terrorists in the definition of what a domestic terrorist should be. Somebody looking to overthrow the government. Somebody looking to send the government a message, somebody committing an act of violence in order to send that message. That is a very specific group, and that is a small list. And we haven't seen that many of those attacks in this country. But now, anyone who's a Trump supporter is going to be labeled a potential domestic terrorist. Mark my words on that. Anyone who wants to see Trump run again in 2024, anyone who is going to continue down the line about, election stuff in 2020. I can't say everything that I want to say because of big tech censorship, and I'm probably going to be labeled a domestic terrorist. So nothing new. I was on a terrorist watch list years ago. So that's a different story for a different day. because I was an environmentalist and during the time of Earth First and when they were chaining themselves to trees. And I was this young 11-year-old who wrote a bill and tried to pass it through the U.S. government, anti-deforestation. And they label, actually, maybe I should tell you this story because it is actually quite relevant and quite scary. When I was 11 years old, I just thought it would be interesting. You know, the representative from the state of Idaho came to my 5th grade class and said anybody could write a bill and kind of went through the legal making process. And I said, anybody? And she said, anybody. And I called her office and I said, you know, I'm Kim Iverson and you came and spoke at my class at Cynthia Mann Elementary School. And you said anybody could write a bill, and I want to write a bill. I have an idea. And she says, oh, you know. And I said, I would like to stop the cutting down of trees. So this was in 1991. This was very early on. People were not recycling. People were not caring about clear cutting in the forest. People were just not caring about the environment really much at all. And I started to care about it. I was like a Sunrise Movement kid, right? I was like a Greta Thunberg. Is that her name? I was a Greta before Greta. And I wanted to stop the cutting down of trees, or at least I wanted them to have to replant them. I was really worried about this. And so I told her this was the bill I wanted to write. And of course, we drafted it out and sent it to the appropriate people for the actual legalese of this. And I went and spoke to a committee at the Idaho State, in the Idaho State Legislature. It passed the committee. It then went to a House vote, and Idaho being a very Republican state, it failed the House floor vote. It was a long process. The process took a year or two in order to get it done. And I made the news, obviously, as an 11-year-old who was trying to save the planet in a way, and who had written this bill that failed in the Idaho state government, but nonetheless had written this bill. Turns out that the government was watching me during that time. They were worried about the rising domestic terrorism of Earth First. They were worried about these extremist, violent, terroristic environmentalists. That's right, tree huggers, people that want to recycle. They would be possible domestic terrorists. And so these people and anyone who seemed to have a tendency towards those people were placed on a terrorist watch list. And what does that mean exactly? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that meant at that time. I'm not sure what they did. I'm not sure how much spying. I'm not sure how much information they gathered. I'm actually just not sure, because obviously they weren't knocking on my door saying, hey, Kim, just to let you know, we're the FBI and we're watching you. So I didn't find out about that until after 9/11. And right after 9/11, anyone who was on a terrorist watch list, they hadn't gone through it yet. They hadn't sorted out who was who. They hadn't sorted out why a person was on a terrorist watch list. But pretty much anybody and everybody who landed themselves in one way, shape, or form on a terrorist watch list couldn't get through an airport. And we also got some symbols on our tickets when they would check us in. We would get four S's on our tickets, meaning, you know, ultra security, you know, check this person out. Always get pulled aside. You know how they were doing their random checks. They would always pull those of us who ended up on these watch lists aside. They would take us into the rooms. They would have to go through all of our things. They would ask us a lot of questions. And it became really, really clear to me after the, second or third time that this just randomly happened to me at the airport, that this wasn't actually so random. That, no, I was actually targeted. If it was happening to me every single time I traveled, then it wasn't random at all. And this happened to me for 4 years. It took them 4 years to figure out why I was on that watch list and to clear me from it. 4 years I was sitting on that watch list. So I had a difficult time getting through airports. I just kind of gave up and started driving where I needed to go rather than going through airports. Eventually that did end for the most part. There was an instance when I did fly to Israel, when I went to go visit the West Bank. Now, I guess you could maybe make some deductions that there were maybe numerous reasons why they would decide to pull me aside from the group and have me go through extra security that the rest of my group didn't have to go through. It could have been because, I still was on that terrorist watch list, but maybe removed by the U.S., but Israel has extra super security. Or it could be they were like, we want to, what were you, we know what you were up to here. We know that you were, you're going to go and report on this. I don't know, but I do know that I did have to go through extra security that the rest of my group didn't have to go through during that time. And usually when I have to go through that, I assume it's because of this incident when I was on this terrorist watch list. I was able to find out via the Freedom of Information Act. So an 11-year-old, if an 11-year-old can end up on a terrorist watch list, and 10 years later, when I was 21, September 11th happened, still on a terrorist watch list for 10 years, at the age of 11, they thought that I was going to, what? Hijack a lumber yard? Chain myself up to a tree? Threaten to, blow myself up or blow something else up? I don't know. I don't know what they thought an 11-year-old was going to do, but they were certainly watching me. And that should scare all of us. Because that's what they're capable of. They're capable. If they could put an 11-year-old who was not at all connected in any way, shape, or form to any domestic terrorist groups, then under these new definitions, these expanding definitions, they can put all of us on these lists. And they will. They'll put all of us on these lists. If we dissent from the powers that be, if we don't like the ruling class, if we have something to say against them, we're all going to end up on this list. And what are the ramifications of that? I don't know. But it's a lot scarier these days now that there's actual big tech. Now that we are so interconnected. Now that we do live our lives online. This is scary. This is really scary. Back in 1991 when I was stuck on a list, there was nothing. There was no big tech or anything. I mean, what? Maybe they were tapping the phone lines, listening on the phone lines. Probably. I don't know. But this is much bigger because now our lives are so interconnected online that if they are spying us, watching us, or shutting us down, because they say, we think that we're going to label you a domestic terrorist and we don't like the types of things you say. So we're going to remove your channel. We're going to remove you from social media. Even if you're not a public figure, we're still going to ban you from any sort of social media because you violate our community standards because the FBI told us so. And you might think this is alarmist, but at this point, I don't think I've said anything to you guys that hasn't ended up being true, quite frankly, in the last couple of years. Even if it sounded alarmist, it all ended up coming around and being, mainstream news. So I would take this very, very, very seriously. They're going after right now Trump supporters. That's where they'll start. They'll say anyone who supported Trump, anybody who was any way, shape, or form connected to January 6th or election fraud claims or any of these other things, they're all going to be watched. We're going to watch all of them because Trump is a terrorist. He's Trump is this terrible, horrible, and he's definitely the leader of the terrorists. And so we're going to go after any of those people. But it won't stop there. It won't stop there. They will go after anybody and everybody, right or left. It won't matter who goes against the establishment. If you're going against the ruling class, the establishment, then you are potentially going to be looked at. If you have the propensity or the ability to rile up a crowd, like, you have a YouTube channel, you're big on Twitter, one of those things, they will definitely be looking and making sure that that everything is on the up and up. And if they think it has a tinge or just a smidgen of looking like it would provoke people into protesting, a protest that may or may not turn violent, then they will shut you down. And anybody, speaking of protesting, you think you have the right to protest? Not after this. Not after they label you a domestic terrorist and they tell you, no, you cannot protest because it might turn violent. And we think that you people are a domestic terrorist organization. So we're going to break up your protest. Because this isn't a protest. This is a gathering of domestic terrorists. And you think that this is only going to affect the right? It won't. This is also going to affect the left because they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, I get it. Right now, you've got the establishment on the right screaming and yelling, saying, this is an infringement. They're coming after us. Oh, no. It's the Democrats. It's the Democrats. Believe me, it'll be Republicans when they get their chance. When they get their chance, and they're in power again, they're going to use all these tools as weapons. And they're going to use them against anybody on the left and anyone who goes against the establishment, Republican establishment. The Republican establishment, by the way, they will use these tools against even Trump and any Trump supporters. The Republican establishment hates them. They want him gone. They want these populist movements to be rid. They want to get rid of them from Congress, from social media. They don't want any of this ever again. And that is both on the right and the left. That is not unique to just Democrats. Don't be fooled by that. If you are somebody on the right, you need to be very, very leery of anyone in the Republican establishment. They are no better. They are all one and the same. They're vying for power. They like their money's, their pockets to be lined with a bunch of big tech and military industrial complex money. And they absolutely will, when they get a chance, they will infringe on the rights of people on the left and dissenters on the right the minute they get the chance. This is not a Democrat issue. This is a both sides issue. This is an establishment issue. This is a ruling class issue. And now we're seeing it, we're seeing it. We're seeing blatantly now. I think there's no denying that it's pretty blatant that the government is completely isolating itself from the people in every possible way. They are distancing themselves from the American people, from guarding the Capitol building, and now you can't even go to the nation's capital as an American citizen. You're not able to march up those steps. You're not able to protest your government leaders. You're not able to just visit. Not anymore. It is heavily guarded. You have no access to your political leaders. We saw last night on this show how Joe Biden and his team, White House team, shooing away reporters. You can't even ask our political leaders questions anymore. You can't ask them questions. Oh, no. How dare you, you little peasant, you, ask the ruling class elite questions? You don't get to question them. You don't get to protest on the stairs of their house. You don't get to get near them. And if you say anything that they don't like, they will just wipe you off the internet. They don't want you to have any power. They'll ban you. They'll isolate you. They'll wipe you away. We've all known for a long time that the ruling class doesn't actually represent the American people. I think that sentiment became really, really clear to people and has become increasingly clear, especially to those on the right. It was people more on the left who took an issue with all of the big money seeping into our politicians' pockets, that they were not working for the American people. They were working for their big money interests, and they were spouting off all kinds of ridiculous narratives and lines telling us that, it's in your best interest. It's in your best interest, they say, to not have to allow insurance companies and big pharma companies to run your medical lives. It's in your best interest. This was something that I hope all of you Republicans watching this show, although most of us, I think, that are watching this show, you and I included, consider ourselves independent. We're not right or left. We're ditching all of it because it's all crap, right? But if you were, you tended for the longest time to be on the right, and now you're kind of like, meh. Which I hear you, right? I was on the left, and now I'm like, forget it. We're independent. For the longest time, people on the right believed this nonsense. And now you know how much nonsense it actually is. It's smacking you in the face right now, isn't it? All of that nonsense that, oh no, big pharma knows what's best. We need to just let these companies do what these companies do. We don't want to regulate them. We don't want to interfere. We want to let them do what they want to do because it's better for us all. It's better for innovation. It's better for medicine. It's better for us. We're going to get better care. We just need to let big pharma and the big insurance companies, we need to just let them be. Leave them be, Republicans said. Leave them be. And people on the left were saying, oh, no, my God, we got to regulate them because they will run rampant. And one day they will buy off our politicians to the point where they will force us all into a medicine that lines their billionaire pockets. And then here we are, that day has come where all of those Republicans who were screaming that we needed to allow Big Pharma to just be are now seeing that when we allowed them to just be, do you know what they did? They bought off our politicians. And when they bought off our politicians, guess what happened? They told the politicians, let us give everybody the jab. Let us make billions and billions of dollars, and we're going to force people into this. And how about we come up with this cool idea called vaccine passports? How about we come up with these really cool ideas? Let's just go ahead and make sure that we get this to everybody. And that now, you've got all these Republicans on the right saying, how dare you force me into this? How dare you require this of me? How dare you? And guess why that happened? Because we let Big Pharma run amok. We let them buy off our politicians. And they did. Because why wouldn't they? And then when they did, why wouldn't they manipulate the politicians in order to ensure they continue to make a fortune? And one of those manipulations, by the way, those of you especially, again, listen up if you're on the right, is that rather than telling these big pharma companies, you need to release the patent to the poor countries around the world, because remember, we're trying to end a pandemic, right? Like, this is the idea. So you need to release the patent so that they can then manufacture their own vaccines and we can get this thing done. They instead say, oh, we don't want to do that. We don't want to release the patent. No. We've got a better idea, says Big Pharma. They went to our politicians and said, why don't you give us all of these Americans tax dollars? We will take some of their money. Let's go ahead and take all of those Republicans and Democrats who don't even want this. So they're not taking it, right? You can't sell it anymore. So the American government is saying, look, we can't even, we're like trying to do lotteries to give this stuff away. We can't give this stuff away to Americans anymore. The ones who've wanted it, they no longer, they all took it. And now the rest are hesitant and they don't really want to do it. So we're trying to do lotteries. We're doing all this stuff like vaccine passports. Like, well, if you get special privileges and certain rights, you can earn your rights back if you're willing to take this, to do this. That Big Pharma wants you, to do this thing. And so, but that's wearing thin. And big pharma companies are saying, well, we still want to make our money because all these billions isn't enough. And so rather than, like I said, releasing the patent and making sure that the adults in Africa start getting the vaccine, instead they're not. The adults in Africa, I think that they've only inoculated like less than 1% of the adults in all of Africa. So now we've moved on to children here in the United States. And who funds it? American taxpayers fund it. And then when Joe Biden announces that we are giving away 500 million doses to poor countries, we're not giving anything away. No, we are paying for it. Our tax dollars are paying for it. And then we are delivering it after we bought it for them. Because heaven forbid Big Pharma buy it. Heaven forbid Big Pharma actually be the ones to, help out, give this away. No. That can't be asked for. So you see, this being bought off, these companies, these big interest companies, big tech, we're seeing that now and again, that we let them run amok. They're private companies. They can do whatever they want. Now you've got Republicans turning on that and saying, whoa, yeah, but this is an infringement. This is now an infringement on my rights, we say. Well, because we allowed them to buy off our politicians. We allowed them this opportunity because we didn't want to interfere. And we allowed them to buy off our politicians. And when they did, we sold off our liberties. But that's the American way, right? We like to sell everything we have to the highest bidder who cares about the consequences in the end. That's why we've sold hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of acres to China. That's why we've also sold off some of our most iconic businesses in the United States are owned by China. Why do we do that? Why do we allow American single-family homes that would be going to your children or your grandchildren when they're trying to start their family? We instead let some big investor from some foreign country come in and buy them all up and rent them to your family instead, knowing that if you can't buy a house, you'll never build wealth in this country. You need to buy a house in order to build wealth. But we allow everything in this country to be up for sale, including our liberties, because now we've allowed big tech and we've allowed big pharma into a position where they own our government, and we, the people, no longer have a say. And instead, if we try to have a say, they shut us down. And if we don't want to do what they want, they tell us we can't have our liberties. And that is just the consequences of allowing our government to further isolate itself from the American people. We've allowed them the ability to literally, quite literally, fence themselves off and be guarded against us. And we've now allowed them, it first started off with allowing them to be bought off. And we didn't want to interfere. We didn't want to get involved. And that needed absolute regulation. And then it seeped into all these other things. It seeped into guarding themselves off away from us and isolating them, shooing away reporters. And now, and then if anybody questions anything, if you question voting or if you question, anything at all, they say, you are a domestic terrorist. If you question us and you question the methods, if you question anything, you are a domestic a terrorist. And our Attorney General today, a man who was supposed to sit on the Supreme Court, which should be scary to all of us, basically announced that anybody who questions and wants to protest, if you want to protest and question the government, you could be labeled a domestic terrorist. And if you commit any sort of act at all, or you say anything that they think might lead to an act, which is like everything, then you could be labeled a domestic terrorist. And so this should be alarming to all of us, that we have now seeped so low into a spot where this goes beyond. And I know there's a lot of alarm going on right now, especially in libertarian and liberty circles, about passports, potential passports that you might have to show to get in and out of businesses or whatnot. That is nothing compared to what Merrick Garland announced today. Because those passports will pass. That's not going to last forever. But the labeling of dissent and the labeling of protesters or uprisings as domestic terrorism, that is going to last for decades. That is going to last for decades. Because it won't just be the Democrats who use this and utilize this and weaponize this against the American people. But I'm telling you right now that the minute a Republican gets into office, that Republican will wield that sword just as fiercely. The establishment and the ruling class are all one and the same. It doesn't matter whether they wear red or blue. They act like they're on different teams on television, but behind closed doors, they're going to the same parties and they're enjoying the same caviar and the same champagne. And behind closed doors, they make deals and they say, listen, I'm going to come out with this bill. It's going to fail. Don't worry about it. But I'm just going to present it. I have to, because I have to appease my base. I have to make them think I'm doing something. I know it's not going to pass, so don't worry about it. And they say that to their donors, and they say that to each other. And we've all known, that has become more and more of a fixture in our American political life. We know that our politicians are actually not representing the people, but they're representing big money. And now the only reason why people on the right, which, hey, welcome to the party. I mean, listen, there have been a lot of people on both sides who've been screaming about this for a really long time. But there has been a larger, I would say, group coming from the left who'd paid more attention to this for a while. But now the right is paying also a lot of attention to this. And that is much, much needed. And there's a lot of things that the right pays a lot of attention to that the left is still ignoring. And maybe one day they'll catch up to, hey, this is the way it works. But what we need to be paying attention to is the fact that we do not control our government anymore. We can't even get near them. We can't ask them questions. We can't question them on social media. We can't question them on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook without being removed. We're not allowed to question, and there's only a certain amount of dissent allowed in this country at this point. And today, Merrick Garland announced that it is only going to get much, much worse. Well, sorry for the doom and gloom message, guys, but that's all I've got for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching the show. I appreciate it. Share this with everybody you know. Really, definitely, people need to be aware that this is what our country is reeling into, and it is very, very scary. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your support. If you would like to support this channel again, hey, you know what? Big tech has come after me pretty hard. And if you would like to support my independent media, you can do so by joining my locals community. You can join and support the show by signing up, and it's $5 a month, and you get behind the scenes content, you get extra pieces, you get a lot of extra content that you cannot get anywhere else right now because of the censorship issues. So you could join my locals account, and it's my community for $5, or you can just follow the community, and I do quite a few free posts as well there. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to sign up for that locals community. Also, be sure to sign up for my uncensored newsletter, Kim Iverson Uncensored, and that is where I kind of give you a roundup of a lot of the stuff that has been censored and some content that maybe you wouldn't see on YouTube. It's a way for you to get that notification. And there's a lot of other stuff in there from other censored sources. So be sure to sign up for that newsletter. That link is down below, Kim Iverson Uncensored. Otherwise, guys, thank you for watching.